Crap. There's no sound. Okay, I'll start over. Okay. I didn't have the mic on. That was a good practice round. So here we go. Okay. I've done this before. This happened before. Okay. So this is really really obvious. We're going to talk about, so if you read the comments on Chris Lucas's channel, which I do from time to time, because I would patiently dealt with him for a long time, and he did not respond appropriately. And I'm fine with people disagreeing with me, but when they say things that aren't true and they spread false information, it really makes me mad, because they trick other people with their stupidity and ignorance. He has a serious chip on his shoulder, and he doesn't accept sound reasoning. And I even patiently tried to not patronize him and bring him into the community. And what has he done? He's worked tirelessly to undermine me and to undermine dishonestly the Seventh-day Adventist Church in a very disrespectful way that makes me have a little bit of righteous indignation. So in my imperfection, I may get overly upset, but this is for good reason. I don't like people who misalign people's characters unfairly. It's wrong. So, okay, good. You can hear me. Let me share this. Okay. I posted this a while ago. So I've dealt with his garbage, and he doesn't correct himself. I've pointed out where his accusations are mischaracterizations, and he doubles down on it. I've taken the time to demonstrate this before, and all those people say is, why don't I deal with his arguments? Ellen White changed the biblical calendar. First of all, Ellen White didn't develop any of this doctrine, and I've asked continually, and I posted it again, show me one doctrine that Ellen White invented. They still haven't, and they can't, and they won't, but they keep lying about it. Isn't that dishonest? I guess we can expect that. I don't like to patronize people, but ignorance is what it is. Okay. Do this quickly. The figure in Daniel 11 is the figure in Daniel 8. The figure in Daniel 8 is at least the little horn in Daniel 7 and 8 have very much overlap, okay? Almost all commentators say Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 is the same figure, okay? In Daniel 8, we're told about the time of the end. The prophecy of Daniel 8, which is regarding the end of the 2300 days, how long till this indignation be over? So he's asking about the end, when the 2300 days will end, which people often miss because they want to make it the whole, talking mainly focused on the whole period, which isn't wrong. It's just that he asks about the end of it. When will the end of it be? And the angel says it's for the time of the end. And he says it's for many days in the future. And in Daniel 12, we see that he will go to his lot, that is, he'll die, but he'll be resurrected at the end of time. And that this prophecy won't finish until after he's dead, which could be Antiochus and that under that part of it. But we know it's future, but it starts in his time period. That's why Daniel 8 is in the Persian period. The angel tells Daniel not to concern himself with the time of that part of the prophecy, the end of which would have to be after the time times and half a time in Daniel 7. Okay. Notice that the time of the end, which the angel tells him that it's not for him to understand in Daniel 8, is brought up in chapter 11 towards the end of the chapter. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, this figure, this little horn, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots, horsemen, and many ships, and he shall enter the countries and overwhelm them and pass through. Daniel 11:40. Now see how chapter 11 ends and goes into chapter 12, which isn't a break in the original writings. It's just how we added a chapter there. So at that time, the time that this is going on with this little horn from chapter 8 and chapter 11, Michael will stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there will be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time, your people shall be delivered. What people? The covenant people of God. Notice, everyone found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth, the many being all, shall awake, some to everlasting life and some to everlasting contempt. The New Testament theology about the resurrection from the dead at Christ's coming and the destruction of the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians 2 is where that theology is getting it from this part of the Bible, Daniel. That's what that's what Paul is writing about when he talks about in 2 Thessalonians 2 in the book of Revelation. Anything to do with the resurrection from the dead and the end of the world and Christ destroying the Antichrist. Christ destroys the figure of the Antichrist at his coming, and there's a resurrection from the dead and the end of the world and the end of the age, the day of the Lord. Whom this person, Paul is saying Christ destroys at the second coming, at the resurrection of the dead. So it's a particular last version of the Antichrist that comes out of Rome in chapter 7, and then also described in chapter 8 in the succession of kingdoms, which, by the way, Daniel 2 lays out as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome, and then the everlasting kingdom. And what do you know? The figure in chapter 11 has to then be the one who's come out of Rome, because he's the final figure who Christ destroys at the second coming and resurrects the dead. And we know that this happens in our future, which means he's coming out of Rome, which means chapter 11 is talking about someone who comes out of Rome, which means the person in chapter 8 and 11 comes out of Rome, which means the little horn in chapter 7, which comes out of Rome, is the same little horn in chapter 8 and chapter 11, which Christ destroys with the brightness of his coming, 2 Thessalonians 2. Now, you can take a view that's different and deny that this is talking about where New Testament theology gets the resurrection from the dead from, but then you would be inept and or ignorant. You can ignore the fact that the figure, the little horn in chapter 7, it has the same attributes as him in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, but all commentators know, at least will say that Daniel 8 and 11 are the same figure, and that there's overlap with the figure in chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 11. Now, if you do that, and then you try to say the Catholic Church is the little horn in chapter 7, you are just totally confused. You don't understand how to put the chapters together. You haven't actually studied the text, and may God have mercy on your soul. I think I'll leave it there. That's enough refutation. Chris hasn't even begun to try to answer any of that or acknowledge any of it. See, so at minimum, he should be saying, especially if you assert that Daniel 7 is the papacy, this view is the only view that makes sense historically. So, and by the way, when Chris first started his rants, his ridiculous obsession, I'll just point out, he had no idea that Daniel 11 into Daniel 12 demonstrates that figure is who's destroyed at Christ's coming via 2 Thessalonians 2, which is basic apocalyptic basic eschatology from any viewpoint. This is like a basic thing that people have known about. That's part of the big rub with, because a lot of futurists even understand that Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 can't be Antiochus Epiphanes, at least in its ultimate fulfillment, right? It's one thing to say, well, he's a type, but it has to also be a final Antichrist. Chris didn't know the implications of what he was asserting, that it basically assumes a preterist version, a very seriously full preterist version, where they start saying Jesus riding on the clouds happened in 70 AD, that Jesus' return and resurrection from the dead is spiritual. He didn't even know that the view he was espousing and speaking against made him into a full-blown preterist by implication if he had actually read the literature. He has lots of books, I'm sure, that sit on his shelf and collect dust that he doesn't actually read. And so he's speaking way out of turn, and he doesn't accept basic correction and demonstration, and continues to repeat his dumb lies. So may God have mercy on his soul. I did try very respectfully and not patronizing him to help him, and he didn't receive it. And he doubled down on his lies after being demonstrated that they were lies. So I have no respect for him and his pseudo-fake scholarship, which is far beneath basic understanding like what I would have. And he doesn't acknowledge it, and he wants to insist that he's some sort of expert, and he's a bumptious child. And it is what makes me so mad about it, is that people actually listen to him for their own quirks for whatever reason. I won't pretend to know what causes it, but it bugs me, because what I think are well-meaning people are fooled by ignorance and stupidity and bigotry. So all I can do is pray for Chris.